Most Christians believe the gospel is the most important news in the world, and most Christians almost never talk about it. Not because they don't care, not because they're ashamed, but because the moment they imagine actually bringing it up with a friend, a coworker, a family member, everything feels forced, weird, and like something they'd rather avoid. This video is for those people, and the message is simple. It doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to feel like a sales pitch. And you don't have to have all the answers. Here's how to actually talk about Jesus in a way that is honest, natural, and genuinely useful. The first thing to understand is why it feels awkward in the first place. It's not a character flaw. It's a category confusion. Most of us were implicitly taught by culture, by social norms, by watching how adults navigate hard topics, that there are certain things you don't bring up in polite conversation: politics, money, religion. These are the third rails. Touch them and something blows up. And so we've trained ourselves to stay on the surface, to talk about weather, sports, work, the kids. We've gotten so good at it that anything deeper feels like a violation of the unspoken rules. But here's what that training actually produces: a life where the thing you believe most deeply is also the thing you discuss least openly. And that's a strange kind of spiritual loneliness. The second thing to understand is what sharing your faith is not. It is not cornering someone. It is not a presentation you deliver. It is not memorizing a script and executing it at the right moment. The New Testament word most often used for the early Christian spread of the gospel is not preach. It's tell. They told people what had happened. They shared what they had seen and heard. It was closer to reporting than to arguing. Peter, writing to scattered believers, does not say, "Always be prepared to win an argument about Jesus." He says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." 1 Peter 3:15. There's a significant phrase buried in that verse: who asks you. It assumes people will ask. It assumes your life will generate questions. The role of the Christian is not to ambush people with the gospel. It's to live in a way that makes people curious enough to ask. So the first practical principle is this: be someone whose life prompts questions. This sounds vague, but it's surprisingly concrete. If you are genuinely at peace in a situation where others are panicking, people notice. If you are genuinely kind to someone who has no power to benefit you, people notice. If you face loss or illness or disappointment without falling apart, people notice. They don't always say something, but they file it away. And eventually, sometimes after months, sometimes after years, someone says to you, "I've been meaning to ask, how do you handle things the way you do? What gives you that?" That question is an open door. You didn't have to manufacture it. You didn't have to force it. Your life created it. The second practical principle: get comfortable saying the word faith out loud. Not in a performative way, not to signal your tribe, but because if your faith is real and shapes your life, it will naturally come up, and you need to be comfortable letting it. I've been praying about that. My church community has been really helpful for me. I read something in the Bible this week that actually addressed this. These are not conversion speeches. They're honest sentences about your actual life. The discomfort most people feel saying them is not a sign they're doing something wrong. It's a sign they've been trained to hide the most important part of who they are. Practice saying it in low-stakes settings. Get used to the sound of it in your own mouth. The awkwardness fades with repetition. The third practical principle: ask more questions than you answer. This is counterintuitive for people who think evangelism means having all the answers ready. But the most effective conversations about faith are not monologues, they're dialogues. And the way to make them dialogues is to be genuinely curious about the other person. What do you think happens when we die? Do you have any kind of spiritual background? Has there ever been a time when you felt like something bigger was at work? These are not trick questions. They're real questions that real people think about. When you ask them with genuine curiosity, not as a setup, not as a trap, you usually discover that most people have thought about this more than they let on. And then you're not converting them. You're exploring together, which is a much better conversation. The fourth principle: tell your story, not the whole story. One of the most paralyzing myths about evangelism is that you have to explain everything. The entire Bible, the entire theology, the entire case for Christianity, before the conversation is useful. You don't. You have one thing nobody else has: your own story. what your life was like before, what changed, what is different now. Nobody can argue with that. Nobody can say you're wrong about that because it's your experience. Paul, in Acts, tells his story 3 separate times in 3 different contexts. He doesn't always open with theology. He opens with, "Let me tell you what happened to me." And that personal testimony opens doors that abstract arguments cannot. Keep it honest. Keep it simple. You don't have to have had a dramatic conversion. I grew up going to church and thought it was just routine. And then I actually read what Jesus said and it changed how I see everything is a real story. It's a usable story. The 5th principle, normalize not having all the answers. The moment Christians feel pressure to win an argument or have a perfect answer for every objection, they go quiet. Because nobody has a perfect answer for every objection. Here is a sentence that will serve you better than almost anything else. I don't know, but that's a really good question. And then, can I think about that and come back to you? This does something unexpected. It signals that you take the question seriously. It signals that you're not just running a script. It signals that you think the truth matters more than winning. Most people are not looking for someone who has all the answers. They're looking for someone who is genuinely on the search with them. Be that person. The 6th principle, don't treat every conversation like it has to end in a decision. This is perhaps the most freeing thing a Christian can internalize about sharing their faith. You are not responsible for the outcome. You are responsible for the planting. Paul wrote it clearly. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. 1 Corinthians 3:6. Some conversations plant a seed. Some conversations water one that someone else planted. Almost nobody becomes a Christian from one conversation. The research consistently shows that most people who come to faith point to a process, often years long, of multiple conversations, relationships, books, experiences. Your job is to be faithful in the moment you're given, not to close the deal, not to manufacture conviction. The pressure to convert someone in a single conversation is not a biblical pressure. It's a cultural one that has made generations of Christians feel like failures when most of their conversations didn't end in a prayer. The 7th principle, let love lead. This sounds obvious, but it's worth slowing down on because it is the thing most likely to be missing when evangelism goes wrong. When sharing faith becomes a project, something you do to fulfill an obligation, something you check off a list, people can feel it. Nobody wants to be the target of someone else's spiritual obligation, but when sharing faith flows from genuine love, when you actually care about the person, when you are invested in their flourishing, when you would be their friend whether they ever believed or not, that is felt too. Jesus did not say, they will know you are my disciples by your arguments. He said, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. John 13:35. The most powerful testimony a Christian can offer is a life that is visibly shaped by love. Not sentiment, not niceness, but the kind of costly, patient, consistent love that is otherwise hard to explain. One last thing. The fear of rejection is real. You put something precious on the table and someone might look at it and walk away. That is a real risk and it is reasonable to feel it. But consider the alternative. Consider living your whole life never giving the people you love the chance to hear the one thing you believe is true and life-changing. Consider getting to the end and realizing that your fear of a few awkward moments kept you silent on the most important subject in the world. Jesus said, whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them. Luke 9:26. That's not a threat, it's a description. A faith that you are ashamed to speak is a faith that has lost its grip on you. The antidote is not trying harder to evangelize, it's going back to what you actually believe and letting it grip you again. Start small. Start honest. Start with someone you already trust. Not a presentation, not a technique, just a sentence. I've been thinking about something, and I'd love to hear what you think. That's it. That's the beginning. The rest is grace.